Under the Shadow of the Three Sisters by Jack Lane Benson. What on earth are these things? The campers couldn't believe what they'd discovered. All around them were several stone statues covered in moss and cobwebs. The abominable creatures they resembled were unlike any beast known to humankind. Ashton, the intellectualist of the group, calculated that these monuments must have been erected by mysterious persons approximately 150 years ago. They looked like they'd been carved to revere primordial yet pagan beings. However, the craftsmanship of the stone statues did not match that of northwestern indigenous groups. Ice pumped through these three explorers as they realized their fate was already sealed. They began their camping trip earlier that week. It was June 1998, and they were kicking off the summer with some backpacking through the Three Sisters wilderness. Ashton, Paul, and Jamie had always enjoyed the great outdoors. Nature was something they had bonded over while still in high school, yet their hiking experience predates even their friendship. When they got to Three Sisters, the scenery thrilled Jamie as she took in the woods before her. "Can you believe this, guys?" Paul shook his head. "Oh, geez, it goes on for like miles or some shit," Ashton interjected. "That's why it's important not to get lost." "No duh, dude. Why else do we have a map?" While she couldn't speak for either Paul or Ashton, Jamie hadn't set foot in Three Sisters area since the summer of her junior year in high school. It had only been a few years prior, but it felt like a lifetime ago. She'd gone camping with her dad and brothers that summer. Their dad used such trips to teach them the importance of self-reliance and practicalness, but for Jamie, it was nature that made learning such lessons worthwhile. Being the most enthusiastic of the trio, Jamie led her companions into the woodland. They spent the rest of that day backpacking until the sun began setting over the horizon. The sky became dabbed with variations of pink and orange over a darkening blue backdrop. After setting up camp, the three friends sat around a campfire and enjoyed a few beers. They conversed about all they'd seen that day during their hike and wondered what more of the wilderness they would see. Paul hoped to take exquisite photos of the Three Sisters. "It's funny how you took a career in photography," Ashton said. "I always thought that you would have taken a career as an athlete. I mean, you were the star quarterback." "Yeah, that was high school, dude," Paul said. "Besides, I took photography class too, remember?" Ashton shook his head. "Well, of course you don't. You were too busy mixing potions and playing Nintendo." "Hey, chemistry is not alchemy, man." "Whatever." Jamie laughed heartily at this interaction. She was unconcerned about recalling their high school days. She'd only been a cheerleader for one semester during junior year. At that time, she and Paul dated for a few weeks before deciding to remain platonic. While Ashton assembled skewers for roasting marshmallows, Jamie thought she saw something or someone stumbling amidst the trees. "Hey, guys, did either of you see that?" The two looked in her direction but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Jamie," Paul said, "there's nothing there, man." "I could have sworn I saw something." He put a gentle, reassuring clap on her right shoulder. Perhaps it was like a deer or coyote. It's nothing to worry about, babe." Ashton then handed his companions their marshmallow skewers, and the night continued. S'mores were always the best part of any camping trip, so they forgot all concerns. Later that evening, they awoke to strange noises. Jamie unzipped the tent and peered her flashlight through the hole. The light pierced through the darkness, but yielded no unusual sights. Jamie was about to call out, but Ashton put a hand over her mouth and shushed her. "We don't want to alert any weird people out here." He had a point, so the three remained quiet. "What was that sound anyway?" Paul asked. "It sounded like a drum," Jamie replied. "Who'd play drums in the dark?" "Hell if I know." Whatever had awoken them seemed to have vanished. The trio went back to sleep, but remained weary. The following day, they got up to an unadulterated campsite. They packed their tent and belongings as they set out for day 2 of their week-long summer trip. While trekking through a meadow, they found 3 long wooden stakes stuck into the ground, as if someone had been there earlier. Most peculiar was a strange esoteric symbol scorched into the soil. Jamie grimaced. "What the fuck is this?" "I guess they were the assholes that played those drums last night," Paul replied. "Hey, guys," Ashton said. pointing to one stake. There seems to be an inscription. Upon close inspection, Ashton found strange calligraphy written on each stake. He studied linguistics in college, but couldn't comprehend the inscription. This is some weird-ass shit. Are you sure you can't read any of it, Ash? Paul asked. I mean, you're a genius who speaks every language. Ashton gave him a dirty look. First off, I don't speak every language, man. Second, I only speak English, Spanish, and German, conversationally. And third, I doubt there's a soul alive who can read these creepy inscriptions. Dude, whatever. Can we please just move on already? Jamie said. This spot's making my skin crawl. Besides, I want to see more of nature. Wanting to escape the encounter, the trio put a great distance between themselves and the meadow. A couple of hours later, they came upon a hill, which caused Paul to become ecstatic. Sweet, this spot will be perfect. Paul ferreted through his luggage and produced his professional camera. He gleefully reached the top of the hill and photographed each visible volcano. He admired how serene the three sisters appeared. Jamie and Ashton watched Paul without a word as he jubilantly photographed. They weren't fans of photography, but were willing to let Paul have his fun. However, Jamie missed the days when Paul was most enthusiastic about sports. After completing his photo shoot, the three carried on until they reached a small creek. Now it was Ashton's turn to rummage through his belongings. He pulled out a fishing rod, cast the hook into the water, and shushed his companions. He assured them that they would have a fresh dinner. Just keep quiet, guys, and the fish will bite. I didn't know that you love fishing, Ash. There's more to me than you realize, Paul. Well, I know you're graduated valedictorian, am I right? Ashton gave a gentle laugh. No, man, I was salutatorian. Oh, right, After what felt like an hour, Ashton caught a bite. The three became awestruck at the size of Ashton's catch and jubilant that they would have a pescatarian dinner. That evening, they were grilling fish in their skillet over the campfire. I'm telling you guys, you're gonna love my fish. It surprised Paul and Jamie that Ashton could cook something other than hot dogs or marshmallows. So where are we going tomorrow? Ashton asked. I think I want us to try for Moraine Lake, Jamie said. You know, close to the South Sister? Paul and Ashton had never been to Moraine Lake. Trust me, you guys will love it. So that's why you asked us to pack our swimsuits again, Paul commented. I thought it was strange since we were going to the coast. Jamie laughed. Not every trip has to involve surfing, dude. Yeah, well, that's how I met Amber. Jamie smiled at hearing the name of Paul's current girlfriend. Yeah, babe, she's really all that plus a bag of chips, Jamie said. Too bad she hates camping. Otherwise, it'd be nice to have another girl here. It's just the woods give her the creeps, Paul said. At least you don't have to worry about Jaws in the woods. All three of them laughed at this remark. Speaking of bag of chips, Ashton said while holding up a bag of barbecue-flavored potato chips. Anybody want some? Later that night, Paul stepped out to relieve himself. He thought he saw something clamoring in the treetops. At first, he rationalized it to be a raccoon, but realized that this animal was much more prominent. Spooked but curious, he retrieved his flashlight. He accidentally awoke Jamie. What are you doing? There's something outside, babe. I just want to see what it is. Paul walked into the woodland, examining the trees to find a trace of the creature. He tiptoed, bating his breath. The last thing he needed was to yawn loud enough and attract the attention of wildlife. His body beckoned him to get back into his sleeping sack, but curiosity continued to guide his hand. Paul stopped in his tracks when greeted by a rustling coming from above. He raised his flashlight upward slowly, and his body shuddered when he discovered the sound source. The unearthly creature hissed at him as it glared with the most fell eyes. Paul sprinted back to the tent and awoke his companions, suppressing a scream, his eyes wide and alert. You guys, we have to get the fuck out of here now. Jamie blinked at him. Paul, what the hell are you talking about? There's some scary-ass monster out in the woods, man. It's climbing all over the goddamn trees. Ashton sighed and glowered. Ugh, Paul, did you sneak some weed or acid along? Guys, I am not on drugs. I seriously saw something. Yeah, right, Ashton said. Remember that crazy shit we saw when we tried magic mushrooms? Like, we all saw monsters then, too. Jesus, man, this isn't bullshit. If you don't believe me, then go out and see for your goddamn selves. Jamie and Ashton both shrugged. All right, Paul, Jamie said. Ash and I will go out and look for this monster. If we see anything, we'll bounce. All right? Flashlights in hand, Jamie and Ashton went out to look for the creature Paul described. They searched, but yielded no results except an owl and a couple of raccoons. The pointlessness of this search left the two flustered. Jamie and Ashton gave Paul the death stare for having wasted their time. I am telling you guys, I wasn't seeing things. Sure, pal, Ashton said. Just take a chill pill, all right? Well, I'm going to keep that hunting knife close at hand if you guys don't mind, but I know I saw something, and it was no goddamn raccoon. The trio refrained from talking about the previous night as they continued their hike. It frustrated Paul that his friends didn't believe him, while Jamie and Ashton still felt annoyed. They backpacked across the woodland as they made their way to Moraine Lake. Jamie hoped that day 3 would mend the growing tension within the group. She didn't think the woods would bring out the worst in her friends. The sun was scorching, so she rationalized that the heat was probably making them irritable. There wasn't much incident all day. At most, they complained a little about the hot weather and the sweat sticking to their clothes. After a day's worth of trekking, the friends made it to Moraine Lake. They first exhaled and then smiled at the view of the lake, especially at the sight of other campers. The three changed into their swimwear and spent the next hour enjoying the icy feel of the lake water. They then settled for camping within the Moraine Lake area that night, feeling safer with other campers nearby. Unlike the past couple of nights, nothing strange happened. However, Paul swore he saw a peculiar man watching him while they swam. It's just some random weirdo who likes to peep, Ashton reassured. That's one risk you have to take with swimming holes. The three campers decided to go back into the wilderness on the morning of day 4. They wanted to get up close to the middle sister. Paul had gotten over the monster he supposedly saw the night before. While he wasn't on drugs, he reasoned he must have been still half asleep and maybe misidentified a random tree-climbing animal. Hours later, they again found themselves surrounded by trees and vegetation, putting human contact behind them. You guys, Ashton called from up ahead. You're not going to believe this. Intrigued, Jamie and Paul sprinted to what grabbed Ashton's attention. Upon reaching him, they saw he was staring at several trees. He pointed at each one to show what unnerved him. There were several trees coated in a slimy, foul-smelling residue. The substance was fragile and could be mistaken for spider webbing from a distance. The odor had a rancid scent of something left to die and bake in the intense summer sun. How big do those banana slugs get? Jamie asked. This was no slug, Jamie, Ashton said. There are no species that get that big. Well then, Paul said. Do they travel in packs, dude? They're not like bees or ants, dude. Plus, I think the term that you want to use is like swarm. Paul then remembered his encounter from the other night. I told you I wasn't bullshitting about the monster, guys. Yeah, well, this proves nothing, Ashton said. Then what the hell do you think it was? You said it yourself. I mean, no banana slug could have done this. Ashton shook his head. We can't jump to conclusions like that, Paul. The longer they stood in that area, the greener Jamie became in the face. Guys, can we just bounce from here? It smells like shit, and I don't really see how either of you can stand it. She had a point. The gray-white substance made their stomachs turn. Creeped out but undeterred, the hikers ventured further toward the middle sister. I still say we should turn back, Paul argued. At least there are other people at Moraine Lake. Which way is back again? Ashton asked. Paul shrugged and attempted to ask for the map, but Ashton cut him off. Dude, I know our imaginations are running wild with like the heat and days worth of exercise, but we knew these effects would come. I mean, it's all part of camping, man. Plus, I remember you talking in the car about how badly you wanted to photograph the mountains, you know? Let's just buck up and enjoy nature, all right? While still spooked by the strange happenings, Ashton's words had a soothing effect on Paul. He did want to take more pictures of the mountains. So Paul gave Ashton a gentle smile, thinking of how a jock and a geek could be friends. It was sunset as they reached the middle sister's proximity. Paul dug out his camera and photographed the sister's volcanic beauty as he had done previously. Has he ever told you how much he makes from his nature photos? Ashton asked Jamie as they watched Paul from the side. Not as much as he would at Playboy. Ashton snickered at this quip. Once Paul rejoined them, they realized they would have to make camp. They would have Cascade Falls to enjoy tomorrow, so they would need the rest. As they set up camp, Jamie swore she saw a face in the distance, but it was gone when Paul and Ashton looked. Well, I'm glad I'm no longer the only one seeing weird shit, Paul remarked. Jamie pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to make sense of the matter. It, it was probably just like another hiker. We saw a bunch of them back at the lake, remember? Didn't you say you saw something on the first night as well? Ashton asked. Yeah, I did. And it was probably like a coyote, like one of you guys said. That evening, at 3 a.m., they heard sounds reminiscent of troublesome campers from a nearby site. The three of them walked out to investigate, but they didn't know which direction to take. The commotion seemed to come from all sides, and nobody else from Moraine Lake came out with them. At least not so close to them as they knew it. Paul then randomly pointed northward, and the three investigated that way. After trekking for 10 minutes in the dark, the den ceased. Somebody's messing with us, Paul said. Perhaps they finally drank too much and partied themselves out? Jamie suggested. You mean like passed out drunk in the dirt and foliage? No shit. They then wandered cautiously back to their campsite. Ashton and Paul quickly fell asleep again, but Jamie sat up in her sleeping bag, crossing her arms over her knees. Although her eyes fluttered, she entertained the queerness of their trip. What secrets did the three sisters hold? She thought she'd heard a cackle from where they had earlier stood, but before she could think about it, her eyelids collapsed. At dawn, the three friends found themselves in a wild commotion. They tore through the campsite and luggage, but their map had mysteriously vanished. I swear, you guys, Jamie said. I had the fucking map at the bottom of my goddamn sack. Well, nobody came into our camp last night, Paul reassured. I see no goddamn footprints. Maybe they pussyfooted super quietly and snuck in and out like real fast, Ashton said. Yeah, sure they did, Poindexter. And they would have found themselves at the end of my fucking knife. Guys, I know I had the map last, Jamie argued. I put it in my bag last night and I did not drop it anywhere. Well, Jamie, Ashton said, even if what you're saying's true, the map's gone. I just want to call it quits with this goddamn trip already. We can't hike without a fucking map. Paul sighed and then smiled slightly upon hearing Jamie's words. Finally, somebody else who wants to leave these woods. The three followed their compass north. They hiked all day with few words, too somber to converse. All the wilderness that transpired disgruntled them to their wits' end. As they moved, not much changed with the location of the sisters. This was uncanny, considering how much ground they were covering, but they refused to entertain this notion and only focused on returning to the car. They realized that all their venturing had not led them north, but west. Jamie threw her compass away in frustration. You gotta be fucking kidding me! It's like we're cursed or something! No, Jamie, Paul said. We're just lost. At this point, is there even a difference? They heard Ashton call out for them. Oh, great, Jamie said. What has he found this time? Warily and ornery, the two followed the cries of their friend. Ashton found a footprint thrice the size of a human's. It seemed almost reptilian, but also had some sort of hoof resemblance. Dude, are these like Bigfoot tracks? Ashton gawked at Paul. If it were Bigfoot, the print would look more like an ape. No ape leaves this sort of track. They then found more prints leading into the west. The tracks led down a small valley before disappearing into a dense thicket. The group stopped yards away, unwilling to go closer, fearing what stirred beyond. To their surprise, they found a variety of human shoe prints in the companionship of the creature's tracks. Some mountain folks are keeping a lost dinosaur for a pet, Paul remarked. Oh, that's hilarious, Jamie sarcastically replied. Guys, Ashton said, these animal footprints don't really match any known dinosaur species, and even if they did, everyone knows that dinosaurs are extinct. This isn't fucking Jurassic Park. Geez, Ashton, Paul said, aren't you quite an encyclopedia? Well, it pays more to read books than watching the NFL or WWF. Paul, Ashton, let's just forget this bullshit and get away from here. These tracks are giving me the creeps, and I am super exhausted. They walked back up the hills northward until it was too dark to continue. The three agreed to forego a campfire because of exhaustion and not wanting to draw unwanted attention. Later on that night, they were awoken by drum beats. These were much louder than the sounds Jamie had sworn to have perceived on the first night, for they were right outside the tent. Jamie reached for her flashlight and turned it on, only to shut it off. She saw a human silhouette sitting right outside their tent door. Jesus Christ, you guys, she whispered. There's somebody right outside the tent. Sounds like a bunch of them, Paul said. Ashton shushed them. Keep it down. For all we know, they could have a gun. Frightened, the 3 campers lay in their sleeping bags, motionless. Paul kept his hunting knife close by, but beyond that, they were powerless. All they could do was lay quietly as the intruders drummed the night away. As if that wasn't creepy enough, several of them chanted in a strange language. The friends remained wide-eyed and pretended to sleep. They kept hoping that they didn't have to draw further unwanted attention and that the outsiders would leave. Hours later, the sun rose to reveal that the strange silhouettes had left. But all was not well as Jamie let out a blood-curdling scream. Rushing to her aid, Paul and Ashton saw the earth around their campsite sprinkled with blood. Jamie held her hand over her mouth. Did they, fucking kill something out here? Or cut themselves or what? Paul and Ashton were at a loss for an answer. They could only eye each other, their faces expressing, I don't think this will end well. What was the meaning behind this charade? The hikers quickly packed up and darted for the east. They knew they were being stalked and were desperate to report it to the authorities. All day they scurried, shouting for help and trying to get the attention of any rangers or fellow hikers. But their cries were only met with silence. It didn't even occur to them that they might lure out their stalkers. By mid-afternoon, their morale had plummeted, and it seemed unlikely that they would find sanctuary. All the while, the 3 mystic volcanoes loomed before them ominously. It was almost as if the 3 sisters had a life to them, as if they were much more than mountains. Jamie tried calling for help again, and she got a reply this time. A very inhuman one. Their blood ran cold as they heard a beastly noise echo in the distant wilderness. Is that Bigfoot? Paul asked aloud. Ashton was at a loss for words because he couldn't identify the noise. He didn't want to think that Bigfoot or some other cryptid could possibly exist. The beast's cry echoed again. Ashton shook his head in disbelief. I thought the Bigfoot video was bullshit. Didn't it look like a guy in an ape suit to you? Obviously, dude, Paul replied. Besides, who around here has ever caught a big-ass monkey? It's possible we could be the first, Jamie suggested. Maybe even She stopped herself before she could utter last. The group was at a loss for what direction to go. They had pursuers in the west and a monster to the east, and going north only meant meandering off course. The group realized that they had no choice but to go southward in hopes of reaching Moraine Lake. At least we're guaranteed to see people there, Ashton said. So they agreed to go south, picking up speed as they put strange beasts' calls behind them. Hours passed, and they still discovered no one else on the trails. That evening, a surprise rainstorm brought them to ease as they sat quietly in their tent. I have never been so fucking grateful for rain, Jamie said. The other 2 nodded in agreement. They had an easier time sleeping that night. The sound of the rain pitter-pattering against their tent's roof and walls was nothing short of relaxing. It was the type of peace they needed after so much hardship. The following morning, Jamie was the first to wake up and stumbled upon a rock outside their tent. A note was attached to the rock, held in place by a piece of twine. Curious, Jamie untied the letter and read a scrawled, crude message. You have been chosen. Tonight will be the night. Jamie's throat became dry, and her heart skipped a beat. What was the note talking about? She did not want to dwell on the matter. She was determined to keep some hope alive, even if it was false. She didn't want to alarm the guys about the cryptic letter. As selfish as it was, she kept the other 2 benighted. With much repulsion, she tied the note back on the rock and hurled it into the distance. They would never know of her discovery. Oh, that rain sure was nice, Paul said as he rose, yawning. Uh-huh, Jamie responded. The 7th day of hiking was the most lethargic yet. The trio spoke few words among themselves as they journeyed southward. No one remarked on the uncanny happenings or speculated on what was to come. They walked attentively, their breath uneasy, focused on the South Sister. They didn't bother shouting for help like they did yesterday. What was the point? The day went by in what seemed like seconds rather than hours. Dusk felt unnerving that evening as the 3 gazed at the sisters and were met with perpetual dread. It was as if the sisters were literally staring back at them, telling them they were doomed. After the strange sensation with the three sisters, they spotted something. A mysterious grove lay below the hill where they stood. Carefully, they went down, too intrigued to think of anything else. As they approached the grove, the landscape became greener and greener. Likewise, the copse deflected much of the settling sun's light. They had walked into a land of darkness. This turn of phenomena impressed the three friends. Curiosity prompted them to produce their flashlights as they examined and ferreted their surroundings. Only when they went further into the grove did they freeze with fright. They could not believe what they'd found at the grove's heart. Out of all the strange encounters on their trip, this one dwarfed them all. Paul, Ashton, and Jamie were mortified beyond belief. Jamie then spoke out in a mix of fascination and terror. "What on earth are these things?" Before them were several stone figures carved to represent ungodly monsters, beasts that did not belong to this world or even this realm. While one was humanoid, the other two were not. One even looked like a gelatinous hybrid of a snake and a slug. "Jesus," Paul exclaimed. "That looks like what I saw in the trees. Who in the hell put these out here?" A lifetime passed as the three stared at the grove's masonry. Out of nowhere, drums sounded all around them, followed by enigmatic chants. They saw dozens of cloaked and hooded people emerging from all sides, bearing bright torches and converging on the hikers. Paul, Ashton, and Jamie stood close together, back to back. "Who are you assholes?" Jamie cried. "What the fuck do you want from us?" The strangers paused and stared with an icy scowl at the three. One man stepped forward, peering from his hood. It was the same man that Paul had seen at Moraine Lake. "You three have brought yourselves into the realm of the lost ones. The stone masonry you see here are our three mistresses." Paul, Jamie, and Ashton looked at each other, confused. "Mistresses?" Ashton asked. "Indeed. The mistresses are the immemorial watchers of this land. They've always been here before the settlers, the indigenous, and even the common beasts roaming the land." The man leered and then continued. "Our mistresses are of an extra-mundane order that deserves the highest honors. The three sisters' land is the window, but now you three have stumbled into the hidden trapdoor." The trio was at a loss for words, only for the man to then ask, "Do you not see?" The campers shook their heads. "Three is a very magical number if you think about it. 3 sisters, 3 lost ones, 3 offerings." "What?" Paul blurted out, fearing that he already knew the answer. "You've arrived in time for the summer solstice, perfect for satisfying our mistresses. But let there be no more talk, for it is time for oblation." The cultists resumed their drumming and chants as monstrous cries joined in their ungodly cacophony. They recognized those calls as they had heard the other day. It was definitely not Bigfoot. "Oh my God," Jamie mouthed. An offensive stench filled the area, one that smelled familiar. The odor was even more repugnant than when the trio had first encountered the clear residue. All the while, the cultists were unfazed as they continued their ritual. The cultists stepped aside as an abomination vaguely resembling a slug and a snake slithered into the midst. It appeared much more considerable than Paul had remembered. In desperation, Paul drew his hunter's knife and lunged at the wall of cultists. However, he was plucked up by a strange, long arm from the treetops. The arm threw him towards the slimy beast, which mercilessly devoured him. Paul struggled as he was being absorbed, but his effort was futile. His screams were cut short as the mistress's gluttonous mass engulfed what was left of him. The gelatinous mistress then regurgitated Paul's backpack, now covered in that same odious clear-colored slime. An identical call echoed from the opposite direction. The cultist welcomed a new monster, a dinosaur-like beast with equine features. "Oh my God, oh my God," Ashton said, his voice rising with fright. Before he could blink, the reptilian mistress lurched at him with lightning speed. It took 3 big bites of Ashton until only bloody pieces of him remained. Such bits remained as macabre decor for the corpse's ground. Jamie found herself alone, powerless, and without an exit. Her back was against the most humanoid of the 3 statues. It was then that the owner of the long arm dropped before her. It was a tall, spindly creature, almost tree-like, with 4 arms protruding from its upper body. Its upper 2 arms were long and lanky like a primate, while the lower set was like a praying mantis's claws. The spindly mistress stared at her with a face too repulsive to put into words. An overarching, sinister grin spread across the monstrosity's face. Jamie trembled, knowing that this was it. She screamed as the beast hacked away at her with its lower claws, tearing her asunder. Bit by bit, the spindly mistress coated its own stone effigy in Jamie's blood. Only a tiny heap of bloody shreds remained where she once stood. The cultists chanted in jubilance, knowing they had satisfied the lost ones, their mistresses. With expiation granted, the 3 entities dematerialized into gray smoke, and their essence flowed to each of the 3 sisters' mountains. The cultists have done well in keeping them content. The cultists celebrated their sacrifice deep into the night by dancing around a constructed bonfire. They continued to play their drums and chant unholy praises to the lost ones. They also took turns slicing open their palms and smearing blood on the effigies as further tribute. The cultists vacated by the following day, and the grove became lost to the mortal world once more. Beyond the cult members, nobody knew what became of Jamie, Paul, and Ashton. A year later, forest rangers stumbled upon Paul's slime-smeared backpack, his camera still intact. When the authorities had the pictures developed, all their results yielded were various photos of the 3 sisters standing in their volcanic significance, except for the last 2 images. One depicted Jamie, Paul, and Ashton sleeping soundly in their tent. The other was of the unholy masonry covered in blood. Authorities discovered nothing else regarding the hikers' whereabouts or that of the grove. To this day, the shadow of the 3 sisters remains ever so watchful.